Thank you, panelists, for that round. To kick us off with the discussion, I will start by asking each panelist to give a brief opening statement, summarizing their perspective on the topic. We're going to start with Cynthia. And Cynthia, I'd like you to give us a perspective on what does sustainable captive power mean to you in the context of CNI in Kenya?
Okay, first and foremost, I'm not an engineer. I think it's always good to bring that out, So I will not speak your jargons. I will speak what I know best in terms of what, as an association and as a champion, what we're doing in the industry. And I think mine is very brief. Actually, I just wrote it down. I think looking at what's happening within the space, the growth in the installed capacity, I think, is a collaborative effort, both on the policymakers and the industry stakeholders and private sector. There's quite a lot happening, and I think we are at a point where we are embracing the changes, working together with policymakers and the government, and just going back to the net metering conversation, which I think the regulations 2024, this actually will incentivize the adoption of renewable energy within the space, and also just enhance the grid stability and energy security, knowing that energy security is one of the, there's an energy poverty, and we are all looking at how can we bridge this gap. But I think the C&I space, or sector rather, is doing quite some deliberate work to just ensure sustainability. And as I've said again, I will not speak much about it, but I'll just give an overview because I think I'm here with the experts who can give us more on exactly what they are doing within the captive power space.
Thank you, Cynthia. We go over to you, Guy. Please give us an opening statement on your perspective on sustainable captive power and what it means to you in the C&I context in Kenya.
Thank you. So it's worth saying that Osprey Renewables is a utility scale investor. So if we look at Lake Turkana, that's obviously the largest operating wind farm in Africa. That's not going to be purely for one off-taker. But what we do look at for other opportunities, or whether that's development adjacent to Turkana, or whether that's other assets, is how can we actually decrease reliance upon state utilities? How can we make their lives easier, whether that's reducing their need to convert shilling into euros or dollars and hard currency, whether that's through producing high quality power, or whether that's going directly to off-takers. So the way that we at Osprey approach the captive C&I space is still looking at the grid, but saying how can we factor this in by bringing a full holistic solution to the grid. So that's saying, how does our generation load profile meet your demand load profile? So for us, that's a really exciting place. Now, we have Engineer Matua here who will know a lot more about it than I do from a regulatory perspective. But the movement that we have with wheeling regulations with open access is really exciting for us because it opens up a new market, and it means that we can go in with investments that ultimately have someone else as the creditworthy off-taker, and we're not loading up with KPLC, which we know you can't just keep on doing that. There needs to be a private sector involvement at some point. So looking at how we can do that in partnership, I think is really exciting. And I think there's lots of lessons learned from whether it's the beginnings of the East African power pool, whether it's the South African power pool or other markets that mean that we're in a great place to make the most of that opportunity at the moment. So I think it's very exciting. Hopefully we'll go into more of those details, but that's how we're approaching the sector at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. We go over to you, Catherine.
Hope you can hear me now. Yes, I can hear myself. Yes, so similar to Guy, our story as Storytech in Kenya was developing utility scale projects for the energy auction market. But that is a long-term strategy. From our experience in the market. And this is why captive power became an interesting area for us. When we did our market research in Kenya, especially on the geothermal end, we saw there are very many opportunities to valorize the excess power or the vented steam at night to produce hydrogen for industry. This is something that had never been thought of before in Kenya at that point. And Soitec became instrumental in leading this movement, interaction with policymakers, and we found like-minded industries or developers who are looking at green ammonia for green fertilizer production. So sustainable power for us means that we can have additionality in terms of new captive solar, wind for green hydrogen production, and also finding ways to valorize the energy that's not efficiently utilized in the country, and creating value out of it for industries that are already existing and are contributing to our GDP, like agriculture, for example, and industry, even services. Yesterday we heard about data centers. So how we can have frameworks in place to get power to them cheaply and efficiently, and making use of the energy resources we have in the country.
Thank you, Catherine. And last but not least, Joe.
Yeah, so first, we are not operating in the market. We don't have any investment in the C&I space yet, so I will not make reference to any investments we have made. But that said, I think when we look at sustainability, the first thing that comes to mind is green. It's difficult to talk about sustainability today while including the likes of all kind of generation that have a large carbon footprint. So that's the first thing that we need to be looking at. Secondly is about, can it sustain itself financially? Can it support itself over a long period of time? So when you're thinking about bringing something into the market and having it self-sustaining, of course, you give it a push by financing it, but afterwards, what's next? Do you have something that you have to keep on funding over and over again and force it to be sustainable? Or can it support itself once you've given it that push? It's called bankability in other quarters. So that is the other thing that we try to look at. But again, the other critical thing is around partnerships. So we have people who are technical and know all the technical stuff around C&I and technology. And then you have people who have money, they know everything about money. And then you have people who are learned, we call them learned friends, so they know everything legal and regulatory. How do you bring them all together to work together and form something that is able to result in a market that is self-sustaining? I think when we speak about sustainability, then it encompasses all these things. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for that round of opening statements. We dive right into the questions now, and I'm going to start with you, Cynthia, and the role of lobby groups in this space. If we look at lobby groups such as Kerea, you know, the role that you play in adoption of sustainable energy practices, especially in the areas of advocating for favorable policies, stakeholder engagement, and even, you know, formation of collaborations that, you know, are going to take the renewable energy space forward. You know, you're a very key player in there. So how does Kerea align with the national and global sustainable goals?
Thank you again, Immaculate. So from my introduction of what Kerea does, and that goes with the policy issues, I think Kerea works a lot with the national government, and specifically I think, looking at Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, EPRA, and the other stakeholders within this space. Recently, actually on Monday this week, we had the validation of the National Energy Policy 2025. So we were fully engaged, involved in the drafting of the policy. We had several sessions on that, just to make sure that everyone else is included in terms of all these conversations that we have in these sessions, and the things that we keep talking about, oh, this is not there, why don't you have this included? So for inclusivity in all areas, and that goes all the way, of course, up to even the gender bit of it. So that is one, by involving ourselves fully, that's part of the advocacy work that we are doing. And number two, also, working with these stakeholders and other development partners, the GIZs and the clubs and the likes, all these people have agendas that they are bringing. These people want to actually just make sure that there is that sustainability, just like Job has said, So when we work together, we pull ourselves together, we are able to do that and make sure that we give our submissions and communicate our clear agendas to the government, okay, to the ministry rather. And then right now, for the past 2 years, we've been very strong also on productive use of renewable energy. I just heard my dear here speak about geothermal. Geothermal has excess energy, they call it direct use. But on this other side of renewable energy, we call it productive use of renewable energy. So we've been having very healthy conversations around that and working with people within the space. Why? Because when you look at productive use of renewable energy, we're saying it's no longer about lighting. We are saying, how can we make the economy better by making sure that people are earning money, you're making a living out of that appliance that you have. So promotion of these appliances, and also just having these conversations and saying, like with the standards body, some of these products that we have currently in the market, because of the, there's a dynamic technology, it's very dynamic. Every day there's something, things are changing quickly. Are we able to keep up? So we're having also these conversations, and that's part of lobbying. Saying, guys, just do the right thing so that you're able to have everyone else in this net. And then also internationally, we have also collaborations with other associations. We attend other meetings just to be able to ensure that what the language you're speaking out there, we learn the best practices, bring them back home, bring these people to our conversations, and make sure that the industry players feel quite included in this conversation and be able to move to the next level. And you realize also that with the government, with the ministries, you have to keep on pushing, you have to keep on having this conversation. Like now, I think the conversations around productive use of renewable energy, which in our conversations with them now, we're now actually calling it productive use of energy, so that we include everyone else. It's going to another level of even going to develop a policy on that. So we're saying, with these conversations, I think we're able to really do much. And also just considering the SDGs, like SDG 7, what are we saying? We need affordable power. We need to make sure that even the taxes that we pay at the end of the day are affordable, and that comes from the policy level trickling down. I know right now I have butterflies in my stomach because I don't know what's coming in the finance bill. We're waiting to see so that we can say, guys, how do we come in? Esak, biogas guys, whoever, anyone in the energy space, because we work together, a lot of us, let's put our heads together. Let's talk about this. What submissions can we give? What can we ask the government not to, and what to? So I think there's a lot that's going on in those conversations. And yeah, it all comes down to the same. What can we do? Captive power, SHS, whatever it is, it all goes down to the same conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And I attest to the fact that in terms of collaborations and stakeholder engagement, you've done quite a lot. We've engaged with the career, with our regulations.
Thank you.
And yeah, just keep up doing what you're doing. I'll come over to you, Catherine. The statistics that I just read when we were starting show that there's an upward trend as far as growth in captive power is concerned. Contribution of 15.04% into the total installed capacity in the country. How then can Kenya lead the region as far as adoption of sustainable energy solutions is concerned?
Thanks for the question. I just wanted to point out some statistics from KNBS, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. On our top 5 exports in Kenya, we have tea, horticulture, apparel and clothing, coffee, and surprisingly also iron and steel. So it means we do have industries that are manufacturing in Kenya for export. And when you look at agriculture, for example, it contributes to almost 21% of our GDP. One of the things that that KNBS report from 2024 pointed out was that the fact that there was subsidized fertilizers and input and good weather conditions, obviously, we increased our agricultural production. So you can see that, for example, in this green hydrogen ecosystem that I operate in, produce green fertilizer that can be utilized for production by maize farmers who are farming different crops, nitrogen-based fertilizers that can be utilized in the country that are currently imported. So our agricultural productivity could improve for some of these exports. Even on the horticulture front as well, there are markets in the EU, for example, that could be open to having a premium on, green or sustainably produced flowers, for example. So there's an opportunity, I would say, in terms of the green hydrogen ecosystem to have these local domestic industries set up, have more production, and also look at the existing industries you have in the country that utilize hydrogen, for example. We have hydrogen is also used to produce, can be used to produce cement, glass, even cooking fat. And these are already existing industries. So if we are able to avail it to some of these end users by increasing our power generation on the renewable energy front, then there's an opportunity there for more CNI. And when I look at the green hydrogen strategy and roadmap for the country, in the first phase, we are looking to up to 450 megawatt of generation for these new industries in the country. And it will go up to gigawatt scale for both domestic and export industries. So these are areas we should look at for existing industries to increase our productivity in manufacturing by having more renewable electricity. And I think it's something that we've been looking as ecosystem players in the green hydrogen space, trying to push our projects forward as well, to see how we can benefit by having these new industries where you are a developer of a renewable energy project, but you partner with someone who can run a methanol plant or a green fertilizer plant, and that way you're creating some value out of renewable electricity.
Thank you, Catherine. Indeed, green hydrogen has a huge potential for industrial growth in future. But without getting deep into green hydrogen, because I will come back to you on that, I want to bring in Guy in here. And industries stand to derive a lot of benefits from integrating solar, wind, and hybrid system into their, captive power setups. Ranging from flexibility, ranging from sustainability, and even cost, benefits. How can industries then seamlessly integrate solar, wind, and hybrid system into their captive power setups?
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point that I made earlier regarding regulations is why we're talking about that question. If we rewind even 12 months ago, CNI was one thing, pretty much, unless you were kind of KTDA and you had nice rivers flowing through your properties and you could put a hydro there. It was rooftop solar. And you might put a bit of battery in there, but battery costs were also quite high if we go back even 2-3 years ago compared to where they are now. So I think it's a really interesting space that we're now in. If we also look at Kenya specifically, Lake Turkana has, unfortunately, it no longer has the record, but it is number 2 in the best performing wind asset from a capacity factor point of view for a single month in the world. So Kenya has this amazing wind resource that can be utilized. Now, the challenge is when we talk to our cement factories, our hydrogen plants that are being designed, or whatever the kind of off-taker might be, they may not be where this wind resource is. But equally, they may not be where the solar resource actually is. So the capacity factors for these resources can be significantly improved from C&I solutions if we have the ability to locate them where the resource is strongest. So that's where wheeling regulations, a strong grid that we can tap into from a load supply and demand perspective is really important. If I kind of go a bit more specifically of where the benefits lie, if we look at Turkana at the moment, it's currently 310 megawatts of wind. But we know that every single day, most days in the afternoon, that amount of energy generated will drop off. And it's a very stable and predictable pattern that we can see every day happening. When's solar strongest? And if we look at the global horizontal irradiance that exists in Turkana specifically, it's the same that we see pretty much everywhere else other than the best bits of Northern Africa and the Middle East. So if we look at where we currently have solar plants within Kenya and Eldoret or over towards the coast, we'll have the same, if not better, there. When's solar strongest? In the middle of the day, in the afternoon. If you put a bit of battery storage in there on top of that, you then suddenly get a very smooth load profile. And instead of talking about a 60% capacity factor, which for wind, which as I said is globally leading, if you look at solar, it's about 25, 30% capacity factor. If you combine the two of them, you can suddenly start looking at 80 to 90% capacity factors, which is pretty much what a hydro would be producing. With slightly different profiles, etc. But fundamentally, it's also cost competitive. It makes the most of the fact that solar prices, battery prices, wind prices have all dropped recently as well. So when we talk about C&I solutions and when we talk about general generation solutions, it's about what's our levelized cost of electricity and our least cost of electricity on the grid. And that's not looking at single assets and saying solar has a cost now of 2 cents a kilowatt hour. It's about saying, how do we look at 100% availability and take all of our best solutions in? And that, yes, for a bit, it may still have thermal plants in there, but it will be a significant amount less than we're currently using today in terms of thermal plants as we use wind, solar that are complementary, and then battery storage on top of things. So it's a massive opportunity. I think the more we can do it, the more regulations allow it. Yeah. Bring it on.
All right, thank you. I have a follow-up right there. You know, energy efficiency is quite a key concept as far as, captive and any other form of setup is concerned. How can industries adopt energy efficiency while reducing cost and adopting solar, wind, and hybrid systems?
Definitely. And you can look at energy efficiency in two ways. One, which was my background before I moved to Kenya, was helping UK government launch energy efficiency programs. And that was looking at homes, that was looking at industries, and making sure that in the UK, not necessarily an issue in Kenya, but in the UK, insulating houses properly means that you can bring down your energy costs. In Kenya, we have the same way. So if we look at cooking methods, if we look at how things are being lit, and equally if we look at how systems are being set up, even in homes where people are putting diesel gensets in place. Someone told me that the latest estimate is that we have 10 gigawatts of diesel gensets in Kenya. Now that's 2.5 or 3 times the amount of generation capacity that we have. And that's all backup capacity or people who don't trust being able to take things off the grid. So there's an energy efficiency perspective of how can we make sure that we're using the lowest cost electricity for the solutions that we have. So that's about saying, okay, well actually instead of using a diesel genset, now the cost of batteries has come down, can we replace that and we bring in efficiencies there? Or when we look at our lighting methods, or when we look at our industrial processes, can we make that as efficient as possible? So that's one side of energy efficiency. The second, which I was talking to Abu about just before the session is we have time of use tariffs now that have been brought in. But realistically, other than starting to drive e-mobility, which is a very small sector, they're not being used to their full extent because, as Catherine rightly pointed out, we're still venting steam overnight. And when demand drops, if you look at Kenya's supply and demand profiles, you could argue that the biggest problem is actually the demand profile, not the supply profile. And that takes the focus off of wind and solar and variable renewable energy and more onto saying, how do we mean that our peak isn't at 2.3 gigawatts, but our trough overnight or in the mornings is down at less than a gigawatt? That's a huge difference that we've got to make up. So how can we start to change processes and the regulatory system to encourage people to smoothen that profile from a demand perspective? Now, that could be green hydrogen is a brilliant example of how that can come in. It could be crypto mining, which might take a while for myself and others to get their heads around how it fully works. But there are the opportunities there to even out that demand profile. And I think the one thing that we could do more aggressively is we could start saying, instead of the time of use tariff being at 5 cents, 6 cents, 7 cents, 8 cents, what would happen if we put it at 2 cents? Because actually the marginal cost of that electricity that we're venting steam for, or even take or pay arrangements that we're having to oblige ourselves by, the marginal cost is zero. Because we're still having to pay these people, or we're still having to vent the steam. So how about we go really aggressive and then we start to encourage those nighttime industries. We start to encourage people to say, oh, actually, instead of, I don't know, boiling all my water for the pasta that I'm going to make in the morning, I'm going to move that forward 3 hours. And I might have to pay my staff a tiny bit more to work overnight. But overall, as a business, this is going to help us. So I think that's a way that we could be really aggressive. And we've started it with the time of use mobility tariffs, but I'd love us to go further. I'd love us to really target that because that would be the first in the region and it would really open up a new market and it would start to solve our demand supply matching problems that we exist.
Thank you. Very good perspective there. I'll come to you later on battery storage, which you mentioned there. Job. Now, there's need to critically examine investment strategies, risk management, regulatory compliance, and operational efficiency. What investment strategies can ensure that captive power remains financially sustainable for industries?
Thanks, Immaculate. So, investment strategies can be pretty broad. And sometimes it comes down to what do I want out of this market? Then that defines my strategy. Sometimes it's about what is already existing and how do I work around it. So there are a lot of things that can happen in a market that then drive your investment strategy. But the first thing that comes to mind, number one, is, and as I said, green. So you will be looking at, for purposes of sustainability, you will be looking at making green captive investments. And there are implications to this. I had Kate talk about manufacturers and exports to the European market. And maybe you are well aware that there is it's called CBAM, don't know, carbon-based adjustment, something like that, adjustment mechanism. Yeah. And it's supposed to take effect, I think, in 2026. So essentially, it means that if you are selling to the European nations and you are not, or rather, your processes are not entirely green or to an extent green, or if you are not, so you are eligible for taxes. So that will only increase your business costs. So how do you work around that? How do you look at investment now so that from 2026 and beyond, you are still eligible to export to the European market? So things like those then determine how do I want to invest in my captive, what approach do I want to take investing in my captive system? The other thing, and it's very important that Guy has mentioned, is energy efficiency. Now, sometimes there is the perception that energy efficiency, well, it's not a perception. You need to invest in energy efficiency, but there is the perception that that's too much a cost and you may not be seeing the returns, at least not immediately. Well, while that's true, there is a long-term benefit in terms of financial returns and how you amortize your cost over time and whatever you get on top of it. So while energy efficiency sometimes requires you to invest in, let's say, proper systems, much more efficient systems, it may be a cost now, but then you will reap the benefits going forward and over a longer period of time. So you are playing the long game here as much as you are incurring the cost upfront at this moment. So energy efficiency is very important with regard to considering energy efficiency in your investment strategy is very important. The other thing is, and is definitely driven by market trends, is technology. We are seeing a lot of shifts in technology. We are seeing efficient technology, much more efficient, lower cost, and efficiency is going up, cost it's going down, and it's continuous all through. So the question you ask yourself is, which system is most efficient for me and well suited for my needs? Then I invest in that, and that's the approach I take. Well, there is a question of, will this technology become obsolete with time so that I'm irrelevant? Well, that's a technical discussion, but I guess where we are now, whatever technology that you can get now can take you on for a certain period of time before it's too obsolete to serve your needs or your purpose. So a lot of the technology development is also driving investment in captive systems.
Thank you, Job. Still on the issue of investment strategies. You've mentioned that there's a lot of departure from traditional technologies now into new, more and more sustainable technologies. How is the investment or advancement in these technologies disrupting the investment strategies?
Yeah, and maybe one, I'll just mention it quick because I already mentioned around the costs coming down of solar PV specifically. There is a much larger uptake of solar. It's almost, when people talk about C&I, even in this conference, some people only relate C&I to solar because that's what they are seeing, that's what they can relate to. But there is much more to C&I beyond solar. I've mentioned diesel, but there is also hydro. There are all these technologies that you can use as captive production. So that technology cost coming down is spurring the market to embrace it more and then try and seek the solutions that best suit them best. The other one is around market, I will say, still on technology, I think storage systems are a game changer, specifically battery storage. And I look at it in the sense that we only have, if you look at solar, we only have daytime where we can generate what happens during the night. So from an optimization point of view, where you have what you can use, you can store it and use it at night, or you can use it to participate in a market where you have excess, you're not necessarily using it, but then thanks to the development in regulations, the market is open, you can sell it to the market. This just enhances the financial viability of your system. So you can make money on this other side, you can continue saving money on this other side. And that is something that you need to look at just around embedding storage systems to optimize existing captive systems. Then I guess the other one around technology is on metering. And I know with the regulations coming, then around opening up the grid and everyone participating in the grid, you need smart meters. Without smart meters, you cannot participate in it. Now, smart meters is a technological development that has come up recently and has proved good enough, sustainable, and everyone is embracing it, which means without it, then you are locked out of this market. So these are just some of the technological developments that we are seeing that are sort of informing how we look at investing in the C&I space.
Thank you.
I wanted to say something, just to add on to what Job was saying.
Sure, President.
And that's on the financing bit. And I think we've been very innovative lately because we know the challenges is the financing, and much as we're having these conversations with banks, and some of the banks are actually stepping up. I think you've been seeing a lot about Stanbics and the NCBAs coming up with different platforms on how you can access financing within this space. And it's good because now they've realized that they're losing a lot, because we cannot rely on grants and all the time you're looking for money out there, yet you can provide money here. But even in the industry, within the space itself, we've been very innovative. And when I say we, I mean the players, in terms of providing solutions for customers, because now there's LTO, you can lease to own. And as long as you're giving me that leeway of, we can make this arrangement in terms of paying for whatever time, and at the end of the day, get to own this. I mean, it's a plus. PPAs, all this, I think as Kenya, as we keep on going through these challenges, we also getting solutions within ourselves into these problems that we are facing. Hence the growth of within the C&I space, because it's a need and it's no longer a necessity like it was before. But what's happening now, we can see with all the installations that we're having, it's become a need. So that innovativeness of financing within ourselves, I think, has also done its own magic in terms of ensuring that the uptake is really accelerated.
Thank you. Let's have Catherine, then Job.
No, I also wanted to just chip in on this topic as well, because in my experience as a developer, I've also seen a lot of growth in the past 3 years in the perception of the green hydrogen space. There are financiers who are now willing to step in and co-finance your project as you're doing the feasibilities to help to de-risk your project, to help you refine your business case. Before it was just one or two, but it's expanded. There's a UNIDO A2D facility, KFW, the DEG, which is also co-financing Soritech's feasibility studies. And this is good because now you can work hand in hand with the potential financier at a very early stage of your project, and they have visibility on the studies that you're doing, making your project bankable. Eventually, this is something also your equity investors look at, what financiers are interested in your project, how much equity do they want to put in. You do your financial model, they have full visibility on what you're doing at every stage, what the costs are, what the needs are. So we've seen a mindset shift, I would say, as developers in that space, seeing these financiers willing to come in a bit earlier in our projects to help us de-risk them.
And just on the innovation that has been spoken about, I just wanted to mention, I sat in a session yesterday and they talked about working, or rather bringing guarantees to support C&I investment. And there was a very good example that was actually made. And for a long time, guarantees has been a concept that we've used in large-scale project finance projects to make them bankable. But we are already borrowing this and bringing it to the C&I solar space as a financial product. So this is just an example of the financial innovation that is ongoing.
Thank you. Catherine, I know you're very passionate about green hydrogen in the country. And really, green hydrogen has, a lot of potential in electrification, sustainability, and all good things. So how do you think green hydrogen and other emerging technologies will reshape Kenya's sustainable and, energy future as far as industries are concerned?
Well, when you look at the EPRA biannual statistics from last year, we talked about the venting of the steam. It was almost 510 gigawatt hours of vented steam, which was not utilized. Basically, it was paid for, not utilized, but is a stable base load that can be utilized by industries, during those times when we don't have demand, the nighttime hours for production. So this is actually one of the areas that was pointed out in the green hydrogen strategy and roadmap as a low-hanging fruit for captive use, of geothermal during that time to be able to produce hydrogen. We also, when you look at 44% of industrial consumers in the country who are the key anchor clients for KPLC and where they're located. He talked about areas with very good wind and solar resource. Of course, Nairobi is the Nairobi region is the biggest industrial cluster, and some of those users are also in the outskirts of Nairobi, like Kajiado, where we have very good wind resources, operational wind plants. We need to think about having willing frameworks in place and having some demonstration projects where you can hybridize solar and wind and actually will it to an industry in that particular area for production, because that Kajiado particularly is an area I've been looking at, and many manufacturers are moving into that area. So we need to provide solutions for them that are renewable as well, and we need these frameworks in place to enable that. So that's an area we can consider. Industrial parks as well in these areas in the northern part of Kenya that have very good wind and solar resource, but no existing industries. It's a challenge for some of these renewable energy developers to get offtake. Of course, you can have your green hydrogen project there exclusively, but if we have a framework that enables industrial parks with different segments of consumers, being able to leverage on some of the byproducts and having new industry is taking in maybe excess heat. We need a framework that can encourage that in some of these areas with very good renewable energy resources, so you can collocate the energy production with the industries and input. So in terms of green hydrogen and the projects you have in the country, I think captive power is going to be, it's fundamentally necessary, obviously, because you can't only rely on geothermal as well. The other producers that are looking at solar and wind for sustainable aviation fuel production in like large scale. There are very many use cases for the chemical industry in the country, paint, as I talked earlier, cement manufacturing. These industrial consumers who need hydrogen are people who we can target as well. And we need to maybe have more of these exchanges in the room, matchmaking. I know H2 Deploy is organizing matchmaking events towards, I think, next month, where you can have a developer meeting different off-takers, other people in the value chain they need to work with to enable their project to be, successful, go to the end. So we need to organize such events, being able to also just stop isolating renewable energy development from industry and think about scale also, CNI going to larger scale for it to also make sense also from a business perspective.
Yeah, so I think I've said much on how we collaborate with the government, and the master plan here is everything begins with our policies anyway. But just looking back, there are areas where I think we can collaborate even further. By one, we can leverage on our complementary strengths. Because we are no longer working in silos like it used to happen before. There's a lot of education that still needs to go out here. It's a gap, actually. And we in these conversations, when we have such sittings, when we have sittings with our members, there are these pertinent questions that come in and we're able to speak to them. However, what can we do about capacity building? We're telling the ministry we need to call you on our tables, and we do that like we have our intergovernmental committee meetings, which equally happens like every quarter, and that's basically on productive use of energy. And we also invite other members, other people from the development partners, some of our members, and other interested parties, and we call them to the table and say, can we all educate ourselves on what is happening within this space? But this is something that we can do together to make sure that this gospel is spread more and more, so that there's that knowledge within the space. And also lastly, so that I do not do much of talking, also is on awareness creation. We need to do a lot of awareness campaigns. And I think anyone here agrees that as long as you have not heard, you don't know about it, you've not even seen any pictorials, then you cannot relate with it. So a lot of that needs to be done, and we are actually working on that.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that insight there. I'm told we are running out of time, but I don't want to end this conversation without speaking about energy storage systems. So I will go over to you, Guy, very quickly. Energy storage systems, very critical, as far as reliability and energy security is concerned.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try and be quick. We could probably have a whole panel on battery storage. In fact, I've been to conferences purely on battery storage. I think fundamentally it's two areas. One is what people generally call ancillary services. So that's short-term frequency, voltage control, the batteries, and kind of spinning reserve, non-spinning reserve that batteries can provide. Now, I know KenGen are looking at an initial, I think it's 4 megawatt pilot project. I think my kind of ask there and my kind of challenge is batteries are getting rolled out across Europe, across America, and even across South Africa at record speeds. That's bringing costs down massively. Bloomberg said in the last year it's come down by 40%, and that's compared to 2017. 7 years, 8 years, it's come down by 70%. So there's the ability for us to bring batteries online very quickly with lower costs. And for me, it's about saying who's best to do that. Is it KenGen at Seven Forks, where KenGen have never done a battery storage system before? Or is it putting an auction system out there saying we've got a site at Suswa, or we've got a site at Lesos, or these specific nodes where batteries can really add value and stabilize the grid? I think it's a no-brainer if you ask me. And that's when I said earlier in my question, both parties can play in this and drive this forward. So ancillary services is the first example. The second is long duration energy storage, which traditionally has been pumped hydro or trying to convert kind of energy forms into other energy forms to convert them back to other energy forms. Batteries can now do that. We're looking past 4-hour duration energy storage into kind of longer duration energy storage. That opens up, as Job said earlier, that opens up moving solar generated power. Later, we saw some good friends at Cross Boundary, I think it was last week or the week before, announced a 30 megawatt baseload, purely captive, off the grid solution in the DRC for a mine site. 30 megawatt baseload, how did they get there? 220 megawatts of solar and 526 megawatt hours of batteries. Now that is huge. 2 years ago, that would not have been possible because the battery size would have meant that the cost was through the roof. But fundamentally, the costs have come down far enough that can now displace diesel generating systems. So I think there's a huge opportunity. The costs have come down massively, and we're seeing it rolled out elsewhere. I think the longer that we take in Kenya specifically to adopt those, whether that's in distributed solutions, whether that's on the grid, we're just going to be losing out and causing other issues, forcing people to go off grid for their own solutions, which then makes our whole grid problem a lot harder as we start to lose people as well. So I'll stop there for time, but it's huge opportunities.
Thank you. I think I'll ask one critical question to Job as we wind up. and high capital investment, initial capital investment is usually seen as a challenge when setting up captive power systems, especially those that utilize renewable energy.
So maybe let me illustrate to make it a bit simpler. So my friend Andrew, because he came to warn us about time, Andrew. So my friend Andrew who owns a manufacturing plant. He manufactures cement, and that cement is going to the construction of Nairobi-Mombasa highway, right? So Andrew is experiencing a lot of unreliability with the grid, with KPLC power. So he decides, I want to put up a captive plant. So what do I do? What are my options? So the first model I said is EPC. What is EPC? This is basically you buy the whole system. So you pay an expert to get the system, come and install it and leave it for you. So what happens is, after the expert goes, everything regarding the system, it's up to you. All the operational and maintenance risks, you have to bear them. If you don't have technical capacity, if your engineers are not trained in maintaining the solar system, then you have to train them. You have to incur cost. That's one option. The third party option encompasses a number of options, but still third party. Number one is PPA that was mentioned. Number two is probably leasing, then lease to own. So what happens with the third party model is the system is still owned and maintained by whoever comes in to install it. And what happens is you just make a payment. So under the PPA model, currently you pay a tariff to KPLC. Now you will not, for the captive system, you'll be paying a tariff to whoever installs it, let's say JA Solar. And you'll do that for a stipulated period of time. Of course, it's a PPA model, so you'll have a PPA that is regulated by EPRA. In a lease model, this is the same as any other lease model that you may have, but the essence is you don't own it. A lot of the risks that come with the ownership of the system, you transfer them to whoever installed it, or the leaseholder. And then you have the lease to own or rent to hold, whichever way you put it. So this is, you pay a lease over a certain period of time, let's say 10 to 15 years, and then at the end of that period, you are left with the system. So you almost assume the same risks that you would have assumed in the EPC model, but way later, maybe when you've got enough time to understand the system, build capacity and all that.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis from Safaricom. My question goes to Catherine. I think she's given us a lot of information about what hydrogen is able to do in other industries. My question is, I don't know whether we have the capacity, or you think you have the capacity locally to redirect the 510 gigawatt of unused steam for generation of hydrogen for example, fuel cell. I think it's an emerging technology for stabilization and backup, that whose biggest hindrance is actually the cost of getting hydrogen to fuel the cells. I don't know whether it's a space you've explored, or is it feasible in this country. The biggest concern has been that supply chain for hydrogen.
Hello, my name is Francesco Ridolfi. I just have a question for you. I forgot your name, sorry, John. My question was, in addition to the PPA and lease to own you were mentioning, when the company does not have land or roof available, and you can actually use other land available outside, the so-called wheeling project, what are your thoughts on wheeling in Kenya? Is it feasible, and what do you see the future for that?
There are projects. There's one project by Capsi Green Hydrogen that is looking to provide power to Mfangano Island, and they're using hydrogen fuel cells. And we also know in the base telecommunication power space, we've actually been engaging with some of these companies to see how we can provide them with these solutions. Last week during Intersolar, there was a company that's also trying to enter into the market using hydrogen fuel cells. Methanol is also one of the hydrogen derivatives that can be used as part of this. So we do have developers. We can give you this information and see how we can collaborate. We know some ecosystem actors, even like Safaricom, ATC Kenya, have been looking at these solutions and seeing how we could pilot or demonstrate some of them. I believe there are some that exist already in the market. It's just a matter of skill and being able to reach some of these areas, northern part of Kenya, where you have this infrastructure. Yeah, so getting those offtake agreements, to be honest, has been challenging with these telecommunication companies, but it's a market that we are keenly exploring in the hydrogen space.
You can respond.
Yeah, maybe briefly. So wheeling we expect it to be a game changer with regard to C&I development. Currently, regulations are ongoing. They have not been finalized. But then what this does, it spurs market. It just opens up a lot of opportunity for C&I. So maybe back to my illustration, my friend Andrew and his cement plant, but then my other friend Charles has a Mira processing plant maybe 10 kilometers away, and there is some grid infrastructure that he can use, but he does not have on-site space to install a captive system, and maybe the same case to Andrew. So what I can do is, it's up to me. I can decide, okay, let me see where's the best place. I can set up a captive system that serves these two customers. Of course, they're all almost like bulk customers, so they'll be eligible on the bulk supply regulations that are also still part of the wheeling regulations in progress. So ultimately, there's a lot of potential in wheeling and what it can do with regard to just optimizing C&I investments and spurring that growth that we are already seeing.
Thank you. I think that's a nice place to end.